Buonasera, benvenuti all'Istituto Italiano di Cultura. Good evening and welcome to everyone. Come ente del Ministero degli Affari Esteri e della Cooperazione Internazionale e ufficio culturale del Consolato Generale a Sydney, l'Istituto si occupa di promuovere la nostra lingua e cultura attraverso l'organizzazione di corsi di lingua, concerti, mostre, conferenze, eventi cinematografici e teatrali. Mi chiamo Danilo Sidari e questa sera vi inoltro i calorosi saluti del direttore Lillo Guarneri, fuori sede in questo periodo. Un saluto anche da parte del console generale Andrea De Felippe, che avrebbe voluto dare personalmente il benvenuto ai nostri ospiti, ma che è stato impossibilitato a farlo da un impegno istituzionale last minute. Questa sera abbiamo il piacere di presentare il volume di Nicola Gardini, Viva il Greco, alla scoperta della lingua madre. Salta all'attenzione del lettore, già dalle primissime pagine del libro, il senso di meraviglia provato da Gardini quando, già dai primi approcci liceali allo studio del greco antico, scoprì, e qui lo cito, di aver varcato una camera segreta che decise di perlustrare a fondo, realizzando ben presto che in realtà non di una camera si trattava, ma di un labirinto. Un labirinto che non sarebbe bastata una vita a volerlo esplorare, popolato com'era di storia e di immaginazione, di schiere di personaggi umani e divini, di vicende politiche, di miti, di sistemi di pensiero, di valori, di concezioni estetiche, di emozioni e di sentimenti. Già autore nel 2016 di Viva il Latino, saggio con cui in un periodo di polemiche sull'opportunità di mantenere lo studio del latino nelle scuole secondarie di secondo grado, Gardini prendeva nettamente posizione a favore. Con Viva il Greco egli ribadisce l'importanza degli studi umanistici nella formazione dell'individuo. Già le più antiche testimonianze, l'Iliade e l'Odissea di Omero, coincidono con un ben marcato stadio di sviluppo culturale e linguistico. E questo grado di civiltà, afferma l'autore, coincide con una insopprimibile vocazione del greco a ragionare e a esprimersi per confronti. In una società come quella attuale, caratterizzata dal costante e non di rado contraddittorio flusso dell'informazione mediatica e dall'appiattimento dei contorni socio-culturali dovuti alla globalizzazione, si ha bisogno, afferma Gardini, di ridare un peso civile a quello che si dice e a quello che si pensa. Il greco, in questo senso, attraverso l'uso di antitesi, simmetrie e comparazioni grammaticali e tematiche, diventa quindi strumento atto a trasformare le criticità in momenti di crescita e il suo studio, ribadisce Gardini, va inteso come riscoperta dell'origine e come valorizzazione della lingua madre. Di questo e di tanto altro ancora discuteranno a nostro beneficio la dottoressa Valentina Gosetti, ricercatrice e docente di lingua e letteratura francese, letterature comparate e traduzione presso la University of New England di Armidale, e Nicola Gardini, docente di letteratura italiana e comparata presso la University of Oxford, autore prolifico, traduttore e artista, che chi ci segue ricorderà, l'Istituto ha avuto il piacere di ospitare dal vivo nel 2017 in occasione della presentazione del suo lavoro Tradurre è un bacio. A loro do il benvenuto all'Istituto Italiano di Cultura di Sydney, al pubblico presente un sentito ringraziamento per la partecipazione. Buona serata.
Grazie mille Danilo, thank you so much. We pass to English. Thank you for such a warm presentation. I am hosting the event tonight, and it is my great pleasure to have this conversation with Nicola Gardini. But before this, I would like to acknowledge country, even though we are on Zoom. So I acknowledge that I am connecting at the moment to all you from Untittled Chapter, and I therefore acknowledge the Camaragal people of the Eora Nation, that extends from the Sydney coast to the Blue Mountains. And I would like to extend my respect to elders past, present, and emerging, belonging to the world's oldest living culture. It is important to remind this, especially tonight that we are discussing about ancient Greek. So Nicola needs no introduction because he's so prolific and he's written so much about just about everything. But my first question to him will be actually related a little bit to all of his other work. My first question is, what induced you to write this book on ancient Greek? And how does it connect to your other work, especially the work that we've mentioned already, Viva Il Latino, which is also available in English, Long Live Latin, but also to your novels, for instance, or to your life journey, to your poetry, to your translation activity?
Sorry. Thank you, Valentina. Thank you, Danilo. Thank you, Istituto Italiano di Cultura, and thank you, everybody, for being here. It's indeed a great pleasure to be back, although virtually. Yeah, it's quite a jump because not only am I speaking from Italy right now, from Milan, but also we're talking about Greek, ancient Greek in an Istituto Italiano di Cultura. Well, of course, I'm Italian, and this book on Greek fits in my biography as an Italian. So I do think that indeed it's good to speak about Greek in the Instituto. But also there's a very strong connection between Greek and myself, Greek and Italian culture, Greek and the Italian literary tradition. This book is meant to be the twin brother or sister of Long Live Latin. I wrote Long Live Latin to make a defense of Latin at a time of sometimes groundless criticism or critique, I should say, of Latin in Italy. But this critique is not only Italian, it's international, although we should not exaggerate the impact of this critique, because Latin is healthy around the world. So many people study it, so many people benefit from it. I mean, those who like it and those who practice it, those who study it, don't really scream how much they like it. The screamers are the very few who don't know it, the very few who have no arguments, the very few who don't like culture in general, not just Latin. So I wouldn't be surprised if these very people who cry against Latin told us that they don't like books, they don't like science, they don't like anything. They think they like science because they've got cell phones and they like technology, but technology is not science. Science is research, science is curiosity, science is investigation and expectation of something new, of something unprecedented, something that could be there but might not be there. And this is true of all study, of all kinds of study. This is especially true of literary studies, because what we do when we study ancient languages, Greek and Latin, for example, or just any literary language indeed, we just construct meaning. Literature is the science of meaning, and that's why we need literature. So the question is not how useful are these things, but how do they operate? What do they do in society? How do they shape us? And why do we need them? Why did I need them? Hard to say. I mean, in the first place, I felt a strong attraction to them even when I was a little child. I'm never hiding the fact that I come from a working class family, so there were no books in the house. I was not influenced by my dad's, personal library or mom's books. Nothing of that sort. There were no books in the house when I was very little. You know, but I liked books, maybe because they were not around. And indeed, I very soon developed, as I do recount in both Long Live Latin and Viva Il Greco, Long Live Greek, I do recount how this fascination for the ancient languages started. It was an irrational one. I just knew I loved them. Well, then, you know, I devoted myself to them. I studied them. I got a degree in classics, and then I devoted my entire life to language, to these languages and language in general. Because to answer you, Valentina, more specific, more directly, studying ancient Greek, talking about ancient Greek, showing its beauties, and the soul of the language, the literary language, means to you know, investigate the core of language as such. Well, maybe I should also say that to me, language as such, that is language at its highest, say, degree of self-fulfillment, is literature. I mean, we talk and words go, they don't stay, or if they stay, because now we've got so many ways to record what we talk about, what we just utter anytime, is not really constructed artistically. There's not an obvious, say, architectural intention. Literature is architecture. Literature builds up meaning. It builds up sentences. It builds up music. It builds up rhythm. It builds up ambiguity. It creates degrees of understanding and you know, different levels. It's a multi-leveled structure of signification. Now, and literature does this in a way that, you know, the oral communication does not. Plus, literature is there to be reread, and that's something else. We cannot re-listen what we say, but the very, you know, performance of literature, or the very kind of public sphere of literature, is going back to it. That's we never really think enough about this. We never really read literature. We need to reread it, because the way in which meaning enters our spirit, our mind, our sensibility, is gradual. We never really fully grasp what a good literary page tells us. So basically, my entire life is about my entire professional life, but I can't really distinguish my work, my job, even from my lived life, from my daily routine. Well, my entire life is about this. Oh, how do I make sense of this? How do I make sense of a difficult Latin sentence? How do I make sense of a difficult Greek sentence? How do I make sense of the complexity of syntax, semantics, vocabulary? How can I become friends with words? How can I make them tell me as much as they can? Because every word can say so much. Even, you know, the simplest word, even the conjunction "and" can do miracles. So that's what I really want to do. And I do it every day. I do it with my own life, with the life of my friends. I want to understand. Plus, you know, yeah.
I just wanted to jump in here because you said something that to me really resonated with, you know, the life of a reader, like a reading, as you say, through life and reading your books, but also something that I felt was really kind of a fil rouge, a connection between all of your books and also your work as a translator, this idea of the weight almost of words, the importance of the single element of word and how it connects through the sentences. And I saw this obviously on your book on Latin, but I also saw it in your fictional work, like Lost Words in English. It would be the Parole Perdute di Amelia Lind, that if you have not read in Italian or English, I really recommend, because it won so many prizes in Italy. And this idea of words, the words are not there by chance. And what I really liked in your books on what Latin and also on Greek is like the idea that when you explain to us, even people that don't know ancient Greek like me, the structure of a sentence, it tells you much more than something about grammar, but it tells you something about words. So here I wanted to connect this idea of, kind of grammatical structure and words, and the idea, as you say, literature in particular as poetry. I think that this book is an hymn to poetry. It's such an empowering thing for everyone who loves poetry. So can you tell us more about this idea of words that you were already starting to tell? Yeah.
Indeed, we tend to think that words are things we find in dictionaries, and every entry tells us what a word does. This is true only to some extent. Only we believe that a word can live on its own, but this is not the case, because words need other words to mean more and to fulfill their function as meaningful entities. So dictionaries only tell us one side of the carpet, but then you've got to turn the carpet to the other side and see the many threads that connect all the words together. So you may think that love is just what the dictionary tells you, but then you open up Homer and you will see that the love, or even a modern novel, is indeed friends with other words. It tends to appear in some associations that will be peculiar only to that book, to that author, to that page, and therefore every good writer, every poet, will personalize the meaning of that word, and will make that word act and live and have its own life. This is, what Valentina, thank you for underlining this, because this is really crucial to my understanding of literature. Even though I was a great, and I am still a great fan of dictionaries, but dictionaries are imperfect things indeed. There's one good dictionary, and that's the totality of literature. That's the only good dictionary we can think of. And that's why I like, when I especially work on ancient languages, where the semantics is very nuanced. You open up, even dictionaries do tell us, you open up the ancient Greek dictionary and you see that the verb have, echo, has like 9 pages. How is that possible? Well, it's not because it has so many meanings. I mean, its meaning stretches to new semantic horizons according to the associations the word establishes with other words. So a word is a word. A word is a cosmos. A word is a universe, or a galaxy, we may say. But then we got to understand that this galaxy expands, and it has so many sides that we cannot shed any light on unless the galaxy is seen from a different perspective, and the perspective will be determined by the sentence. Plus, a word is, even before it enters a sentence, a word is not just that. A word has a history or a life story, because it derives from something, because so many others before me, before us, have used it. So a word is never alone. A word, even when it's isolated, even when you see it, written in a blank page, just, alone, completely isolated, it's not isolated, because around it you see nothing. But behind the sheet of paper, there's a chasm of memories, and it's the Greek origin, the Latin origin, and the many other occurrences that the word has received in literature. So a word is never deprived of memory. A word will never have Alzheimer's. A word will always have relatives. It has a lineage behind it. which is made of the etymology of, you know, the previous occurrences. Plus it has a lot of relatives, because over the years, it got associated with so many other words. I mean, this is something Virginia Woolf said beautifully in the only one extant recording of her voice, which is kept at the British Library in London. And she says that, you know, a word comes, I mean, when you use a word, you basically marry not just that word, but the entire family of that word. And that's true. And so literature is always, I mean, good literature, I mean, not commercial literature, which, you know, will not stay, which we will not go back to, but, you know, the classics. I'm going to try, I'm going to give you a definition of what a classic is. A classic is a book, but we could say an author, who perfectly knows that words have relatives. And therefore, a sentence also will, yes, shift the meaning of the word according to the companions of that word in the sentence, but also knows that that word is thinking, maybe unconsciously, of its own past. A word has always a past. When we use it, we give it a present, but we cannot deprive it completely of its own memories. Just like words are like people, are like persons. I mean, we are now together, talking to one another, listening to one another, and we forget that we have a mom and a dad, that we have children, but we do have them. They're with us. And maybe I speak like this because I've got them. Well, I have no children, but I've got other things, and they're with me all the time. So the problem for a writer is indeed to select words so that memories do not become overbearing and to, you know, overflowing, because, you know, when you create a sentence, you've got to adjust the meaning of what you want to say to the rest. But, you know, meaning can also spring out from the sudden combination of words without your previous expectation or even intention to have that meaning come out. So that's what I say. So yeah, the sentence, the line in poetry, verse, is indeed the space where words perform their best, to the best of their ability.
Yeah, so that's a very interesting idea of the history of the word that becomes, as you were saying now, even more complex when the words are inserted in a context like a line. So they enter in relationship with other words and thus other families and other ancestries. Because one of the most compelling and amazing thing about your book on Greek that you know I've recently read is this idea that at the very basis of this language is really the idea of continuous comparison, contrast, relationship with other words, but not just with other words, as you show so well, also thanks to the very grammatical structure of Greek, that you cannot, in this language in particular, avoid comparison, contrast, agonism, in a sense, to use a Greek word, or another word of Greek origins, dialogue. So it is just impossible to throw something there by itself. So what I wanted to ask you is also both a linguistic question, but also maybe a broader question. What can we learn from this feature of Greek as maybe people that study languages, but also as normal human beings, you know, picking up your book?
Yes. When I started writing this book, I knew I had so much in front of me and behind me, because also the Greek tradition is much longer than the Latin tradition. It starts much, much earlier. So it starts centuries earlier. Homer lived, or whoever Homer we should take for, say 7, 8 centuries before Cicero. You know, by the time Latin literature starts accomplishing anything, you know, the trajectory of Greek literature, I'm not going to say it's completed, but it's really, you know, very, very long already. And so much has been accomplished: epic poetry, tragedy, lyric poetry, comedy, oratory, history, philosophy, you know, all genres, even though the ancients wouldn't speak of genres, but, you know, all kinds of modes were there. And the Roman writers learned from that. I mean, the Latin literature is a systematic imitation of Greek literature. But, you know, I didn't want to write a book on, you know, the accomplishments of epic poetry, blah, blah, blah. But no, I didn't want a gallery of forms. I really wanted to see whether, you know, behind so much richness, behind so much variety, there was a unifying principle. So my question was, what did this language do as a language? What is there a unifying principle? Do languages have a soul? What's the purpose of writing for Greek? Okay, I quite soon came to realize that a Greek writer, a Greek poet, a Greek orator, blah, 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 a Greek comic poet, will be prompted to write if she or he has some comparisons to make, or some relationship to establish. So writing is always perceived and practiced as a way to meet something else, somebody else. And Greek literature does start, indeed, very obviously in this way. Think of the very first epic poem which we have received, the Iliad, Greeks, Trojans. And it's all about, you know, it's a conflict, but it's not necessarily always a conflict. Sometimes there's love, there's friendship, there's alliance, there's hospitality. All of these are indeed very Greek ideas. But in my book, I show that they're not just Greek ideas. They are realizations of, you know, social configurations of this relativistic idea, where if there's an A, there must be a B. If there's me, there must be you. Actually, if there's you, I am the way I am. So identity, this very difficult word, in Greek literature, in the Greek mind, we may say, is always something which mirrors something else. It's never absolute. Now, this is also true in grammar, because the Greeks, most characteristic form of Greek syntax is the bipartite structure, where you've got a first part saying men, which you do not translate, and the second part is de, which means on the contrary, instead, and. So the Greek mind, you know, expresses its own bifrontism, you know, love for symmetries, antitheses, relationships of any kind, friendly or hostile, even in syntax. And you will see that that word will be opposed to that other word, and so on and so forth. And I show this with, I think, with enough evidence. Now, what do we learn from this? We learn respect, we learn attention, we learn to observe, we learn to posit ourselves in a context where nobody is alone. And my identity is not better than any other identity. So we learn peace, we learn truce, we learn truth, which is conciliation, reconciliation, which is a process of negotiation, a process of agreement. Because when you have a relationship, of whatever sort, as I said, hostile or friendly, there's a space between A and B, and that space is not a void. It's indeed a territory. Both parties are meant to cover and make something of. And that could be war, it could be love, it could be friendship, it could be alliance, and so on and so forth. So what I think a Greek culture has to teach us today is not the fact that it's the culture. We're past that historical moment when the primacy of Greek and Latin was considered absolute. I mean, nobody today would dare say that's the culture. I mean, there are so many other cultures in the world, some of which are not even written cultures. And that makes them cultures on a par with Greek culture. So my point is not that we learn from the Greeks something absolutely superior, but we do learn something very peculiar. We learn how to become diplomatic, how to become understanding, how to become open to dialogue. And I'm glad, Valentina, you mentioned that word, which is a characteristically Platonic word. But, Plato is indeed supposedly the inventor of dialogue. Indeed, the dialogic form is basically the only form Plato resorts to for his philosophical discussions. But dialogue existed already in theater. If you read Greek tragedies, it's all about, talking to one another. Not only characters talk to one another, but the characters talk to the chorus, whatever. Anyway, we learn dialogue.
That's another thing to continue this discussion, but I want to say something first. If anyone has got some questions, I would like this to be quite interactive. So please, if you know how to use the chat, start writing them in the chat and I will try to summarize them. But after this question, I will also, start giving you space if you got a pressing question. So start gathering your thoughts, because we have this amazing opportunity to have Nicola hostage here with us. So if you got one or two comments or questions, and I would ask you to keep them a little brief, because we're many people here tonight, so maybe lots of people have got a question. So I wanted to continue the idea of dialogue, and the idea, so we went from words through structures, and now we're almost hitting the idea that we impose on the literature of genre. So here, another thing that I learned is the reinterpretation of many classics that I had seen through other ways of reading, but through this idea of comparison, contrast, I read them in a completely different way. And one that really came across as totally different in my mind was Herodotus. When you show him almost as kind of an admirer of difference,
Yes.
when he describes, as you were saying, almost cultural relativism, but in a sense, the idea of observing the other to learn about oneself.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. Herodotus is I was going to say it's the first Greek historian. He was not the first, but he's the most important historian of Greek literature before Thucydides. And, the Romans would call him the father of history. Indeed. Why? Because, well, we're talking about an author who was active in the 5th century BC. He recounted the Persian Wars. The Persian Wars were probably the most important historical event in antiquity before the Punic Wars. But anyway, the Persian Wars, which established the supremacy of Athens in Greece, then also became a very important propagandistic issue, theme, which Athens used a lot. And we still today think of the Persian Wars as an important divide historically and culturally. Anyway, the Persians wanted to conquer Greece. They had already conquered Greek cities in Asia, Greek colonies, and the king, the Persian king, wanted to also get Greece. Now, Greece was not a united state. It was made of many states, and these states did not really get along with one another. So they were, let's think of Greece as a political system constantly at war. It's never at peace. It's always at war. There were truces, but those were exceptions. So do not say, oh, a war started. No, a truce started. It was a constant state of competition, of military competition. Now, two cities were particularly important, Sparta and Athens. These two became allies, and they managed miraculously to triumph over a very, very dangerous enemy and very powerful one, the Persian monarchy. Herodotus does recount the main events of these wars, which happen in basically in 490 and 480 and 479. But before telling us what happened, he describes the Persian Empire, which was huge, and very diversified. Many languages, many peoples, many customs, all kinds of strange habits. Now, Herodotus, for many modern people, many modern writers, just think of the wonderful Polish journalist Kapuscinski, was an amazing traveler, almost an ethnographer, somebody who voraciously learned from anyone. Now, that's not really correct. I mean, I love Kapuscinski as a writer, and I do love his book on Herodotus, Traveling with Herodotus. I strongly recommend that book. But Herodotus did not travel around, if he did actually travel, because also that is not really completely ascertained. He might have seen not every place he speaks about. But Herodotus recounts so much of the Persian Empire to give us as full a picture as possible of the enemy. He wants us to know what Athens triumphed over. So he respects the other, indeed, and he indeed emphasizes the importance of the enemy, because then we can say, well, Athens was really amazing in winning, because the enemy was a very civilized enemy, a very powerful one. But why is it good that Athens became the winner? Why then shouldn't the Persians, if they were so civilized, be the winners? Well, there's a political difference there. And that's the gist of Herodotus' histories. The difference is that Athens was a democracy and Persia was a monarchy. And the monarchy for Herodotus means a tyranny. Now, tyranny is a big thing in Athenian historiography, oratory. Athens itself had been a tyranny before becoming a democracy. So tyranny is indeed the worst political model some Greeks could think of Athens. Sparta was a monarchy, actually. So you see also that there's also like a triangulation there. By condemning the Persian monarchy, Athens was also condemning the Spartan monarchy. Anyway, but this said, I mean, it's very good. It's very important to keep this in mind, that Herodotus dismisses the Persian Empire as politically inferior, but only politically, not culturally. That's very important, because you will often hear that the Greeks were, very pride, very bold, very self of themselves, very full of themselves. But that's a very one-sided way to put things. The Greeks, and we should say the Athenians, who spoke for the Greeks, felt superior because they had a superior form of politics. That is, all the citizens, the citizens ran the state. And, but let's not exaggerate now in thinking that Athenian democracy was a perfect regime, because it's a different democracy to our idea of democracy, because not all citizens actually participated in the life of the state. The slaves were excluded, women were excluded, blah, 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 blah. Nonetheless, so many male citizens did indeed take part in the assembly. And that was a very important difference. So I'm going to conclude. My point is that the ancients had no racism. They had no colonial attitude. They could conquer another city, but still respect it culturally. This is obvious also with the Greek, with the Roman Empire. I mean, if the Romans had been racist, they would have destroyed all traces of previous cultures. They did not, actually. They conquered Greece and they just subjugated themselves to the superiority of Greek culture.
That's a very important discussion, Nicola, also the one that you said before, because in Australia, I don't know whether you're aware at the moment, there have been lots of debates about, especially where we are geographically on the map, we cannot, as you say, impose in a sense this idea, which is dated and obviously disputed and wrong, of the fact that, this Greek is the supremacy of, what's also called Western culture, as if it was like kind of an oracle. As you say, this idea of relativism is very important also within this broader discussion. So I really like this intervention. The last one really showcases the idea of how a chapter in your book develops. So through words, structures, and then we get to, a wider message, which is open to all that want to pick up the book, not just people that are into, Greek grammar. But we have a very interesting question about Greek grammar. So what I would suggest, I had just one last thing to say, because I really love that bit and I just wanted to convey to everyone. But if we can be, quite rapid with this response, and then I will go on to questions from everyone in the audience. We already have a very interesting, more technical question in the chat that we will take just after this. I just wanted to say this because I really loved reading that. So I want to share with all of you. There, throughout all the chapters, at a certain point, we arrive to a chapter on tragedy. And the thing that is really amazing in Nicola Gardini's writing is that there is always like kind of a personal introduction that really makes us feel how it is to be a learner, a reader of Greek, or a translator, really this love for literature. But here we find out the moment when this love started, and we are taken aback to Christmas 1980, when young Nicola was reading Sophocles' Antigone for the first time. And he realized, and I say it in Italian, is a direct quotation, and then I try to translate it. He realized that I libri potevano essere la mia voce. So books could be my own voice. So the importance, it's really a love letter, this book, to literature. Not just, that's what I really like. Like, it's not just this ancient Greek, the idea of this mother tongue in a sense of the ancestry of our mind, but it is a love letter to reading, to discover oneself and how we can find ourselves out through fictional characters. Sometimes they can speak our own truths. So just if you can say a couple of sentences about this adventure that brought you, as a reader, as a lover of words, a lover of poetry that brought you here. And then we go on to the question that we have in the chat and to any other questions.
Yes, thank you, Valentina. You're a wonderful, not just friend, but also interlocutor. You picked on a very important passage for me. Yeah, when I recount how my love for Greek tragedy started, I was 15. I was attending what is called Liceo Classico in Italy, a classical high school where you do study Latin and Greek. But I was too young still to read the tragedy in the original language, so I only read a translation of it. Which is also a way to tell my readers, if you don't know Greek, don't worry. I mean, you can really be converted to Greek literature also by translations. And I mean, so much of the world is based on translations. Yeah, Antigone, I felt like Antigone. Antigone opposes the tyrannical system. She sacrifices herself. She is adamant about her convictions. That's how I felt back then, and that's probably how I feel now too. And Valentina, mentioned this part where I say I probably then realized that I could make books my own voice. Yeah, because becoming a reader means to, becoming bigger than you are. It means to give oneself more space, more soul, more memory. You start kind of living out of yourself. You don't need to worry. You don't need to think too much to describe your own inner life, because others have done it already. And you feel in good company then. Not only do you stop feeling alone, but you now know who you are. And that gives you some rest, some peace, and you feel in some harmonious connection with others, Sophocles, Antigone, Greek culture, Greek language, translations, but also with yourself. And that's what we need literature for, because we need it to expand our egos. They're so small, they're so limited, but there's an ego which is larger than our own self. And it's just a matter of reading, and then you won't choose really Antigone. She will choose you. And you are not forced to like her. If she likes you, well, it's done. You're hers forever.
And then that's what happened to you, I'm afraid. So we have one very touching comment in the chat, and then we pass on directly to the question by Andrea Tenconi, and also gather your thoughts for other questions in the meantime. So Julia Torello Hill says that her friend at Columbia University, Christian Mercer, teaches Antigone as part of a rehabilitation program for inmates in a New York prison. Her students often connect deeply with Antigone's personal struggle. That's amazing, if there was a testament to the importance of literature. And then we have a question by Andrea Tenconi, then we have Peter Tesoriero. So let's start with Andrea Tenconi, said whether you could elaborate on the idea of relationships and verbs tenses, which was the first thing that he thought of when I first learned about tonight. So relationships and verb tenses.
Yeah, very good question. I'll try to give you a clever answer. Okay, relationships, philia, friendship, eros, love, not necessarily physical, but also physical, symakia, alliance, we've got all of that. So how do verbs create companionships in the sentence? Let's consider Latin first. Latin is indeed the language of an empire, because the very way in which verbs work in a long clause is imperialistic. this depends on that, and that depends on that, and that depends on that. So you can't really, there must be a necessary connection between verbs. This was not very consistent before Cicero. Cicero created this so-called consecutio temporum, the consequentiality of tenses in a long clause. So if you have that subjunctive, then you must necessarily have that one subjunctive, and you can't just, you know, use any tense as if it were not depending on another tense. This is Latin. Greek has no consecutio temporum. So you can have any verb according to the sensibility of the writer. In Greek, you will have, plus in Greek, you also have moods you don't have in Latin. For example, the optative, which expresses desire, wish, or even some historical idea in the past. Some historical notion in a secondary clause. But that's not really important now. The point is that why so much liberty if it's all about creating symmetries, you know, relationships? Why are Greek tenses so free? Why that subjunctive will not determine necessarily the use of that subjunctive, just like Latin will do? Well, because in Greek, relationships are not a priori, but they happen now, and any relationship is different. So you work out the way in which A relates to B and vice versa. In Latin, everything is basically a priori when it comes to the use of tenses. If I use this, I must use that one. I'm going to give you an example in English. Virgil knew what love is. It makes perfect sense. We can say that in Italian too. Virgilio sapeva che cosa è l'amore. If you want to really be elegant, you can say, well, Virgilio sapeva che cosa sia l'amore. Now, in Latin, that sentence would be incorrect because Virgil knew, that's a past tense. So the secondary clause, the secondary sentence, what love is, must be in the past because Virgil knew. So Virgil knew what love was. And that's fixed. There's no way out. Then when you translate, of course, you can say Virgil knew what love is because we understand that love is a universal principle and you don't need to locate it in time and connect it with Virgil's knowing in the past, right? Greek is completely free from such constraints. So indeed, Greek would work exactly like Italian or English, or probably French and Spanish and Portuguese and Russian and German, blah, 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 blah. So Greek would say Virgil knew what love is, exactly. But why? Because, as I said, the relationship, A and B will preserve their autonomy. So a relationship is not a way to cancel singleness, autonomy, originality, independence. You don't make that dependent on this. They will be on a par. What is important is that they meet now and they create some kind of companionship, but it's a temporary one. So that's how the tenses are freer in Greek because of this.
Thank you so much, Nicola. We have, as you were speaking, lots of comments coming in the chat. I really like this format, so keep them coming in. So people were drawing parallel with French. Then Giulia Torello Hill, who is a massive expert on Latin as well. So she was reminding us that archaic forms of Latin have optative, for instance, in Terence. And so we can see here that even from a linguistic point of view, what I really like about this discussion is the fact that this is exactly how you can approach the book. So you can approach it like someone like me, from someone ignorant of Greek, and you just, you know, can't wait to take it up now because I really want to know more. Or you can also dig deeper into, you know, comparative linguistic discourses, or, you know, how is it different from Latin? How, you know, can I gather from my knowledge of Italian or French? So we have a question by Danilo, but there was someone first. Peter was dying to, was really keen on asking a question. Peter, would you like to ask it vocally? Okay, you have to open your microphone. Can you do that? Yeah, okay.
Now?
Yeah, go ahead.
I would like to go to the very fundamental beginning. Why do we need these languages, was the question you asked. And the answer is, with great respect, and I did go to a summer school, and Latin summer school a few years ago at Sydney University to try and brush up my Latin, but I know it's an impossible task. I will never have your expertise. But the question really, to me, suggests that we should approach this with extreme caution, because one of the many of the reasons why people did go to study these things in the past were, to some extent, reprehensible. I say that with great respect for this reason. Sydney is full of grammar schools. People send their children to grammar schools. They don't know why the word grammar is there. And that was that barrier between the ruling classes, or the upper classes, and the ordinary people. This was reflected in modern Greek, between the distinction between, they called the demotiki and the katharevousa, which was structured to keep people away from education and to keep education as the preserve of the privileged. So there are all sorts of reasons why we should approach this thing with great respect, I say this to you, with extreme caution. I've only understood Tolstoy and Dostoevsky and Cervantes and all of these people through the medium of translation. And that's the only way I can get. I've read various different translations at different times. And one of the things that really concerns me, I'd like you to talk about this, because you mentioned, I think you said something about what is love? Well, no, yes, love. And then we've got that distinguish between agape. What were the two words, the two different words that had different meanings? All sorts of confusions for ordinary people on the ground like me. It's your scholarship, which is great, but we can't all aspire to it. And it can be extremely dangerous. And I want to just come back to one last question. We have in our Australian culture here an obsession about the Anzacs at Gallipoli and bravery. And I ask myself, and I wonder if the Greeks, when I read the Iliad, for example, which is so full of what I would call pretty reprehensive behavior, fighting over women and fighting over spoils, bloodthirsty murdering of your adversaries, all of that sort of stuff is a little bit distasteful to me. But our question is, our great historian of the Australian Army has, because he was there near where he thought Troy was, has made a virtue of what he calls bravery. And I wonder if bravery is a virtue. And what is a virtue? I mean, it brings us back to Dante, you know, fatti non foste vivere come bruti, ma perseguire virtute e conoscenza. And virtute is that quality that elevates us above animals, I suppose. Well, reading of the Iliad as a pure layman, I sometimes feel that they were less than what we should aspire to. And the last thing I would like to say is, when you were talking about Greek democracy, and you quite rightly said that it was a very deficient sort of democracy, the one thing we ought to reflect on is that on the hill of Areopagus, the orator would get up and make some sort of oratory, and all the citizens are entitled to vote on the guilt or innocence of the person accused. We made a spoof of Vittorio De Sica made a spoof of it in that old movie, Il Processo di Fine. I don't know if you remember that.
Let's keep them short, the questions, because I would like to give space to someone else. So
that's the last bit. So, you know, the Greeks left us no law. The Romans did. For all their brutality and for everything else, they left us. So I think we should approach, I come back to this, what is your comment on, should we approach this scholarship with great caution without being too ready to attribute praise without the necessary scholarship that you've got that most of us don't have?
Okay, thank you. That we can let's address this last part. The rest, I think, was more of a comment. So let's address this last part. So, you know, should we approach it with caution? I also like a good debate. So I'm sure that many people in the audience would disagree with some of what you said. Some other would agree. So we'll take this up, you know, in the chat if you want. But on this last point, Nicola, what do you think about that? Should we be cautious?
Well, we should be cautious every time we consider historical distance. And the Greeks, again, teach us to be aware of the relationship we establish with the other or the others. And so they tell us, be cautious when you deal with us too. So do understand us as different and take what's good about us. Plus, you know, it's very good to remember that, you know, this kind of education for decades, centuries even, you know, lifted barriers between social classes, but that's got nothing to do with the fact that Greek culture is an interesting culture. So, and we do not want to, you know, give it up just because for centuries it was an elitist education. I'm, as I said at the very beginning, the son of a working class family. I was the poorest in my school. Why shouldn't I get the same education as the other kids? And I can tell you, I was the best student in my year. Barriers didn't really count. So let's not keep them if they constrain us, if they leave us where we start. We want to go beyond any barriers. Greek is for everybody. And because it's for everybody, you know, Nazis use it, fascists use it, but that doesn't mean that Greek culture is fascist. That doesn't mean that Greek culture is Nazi. It really depends on the use we make. One last word on the Iliad. The Iliad is a very violent poem, indeed. Let's not forget, though, it's a poem that speaks of a very different society, of a very different culture. And let's not forget that, though, it's also disseminated with moments of conciliation and reconciliation. Indeed, I do remember, I do mention a very important episode in my book, which is the encounter of Priam and Achilles, you know, two arch enemies who, for a moment, though, managed to talk to one another and make up some kind of peaceful agreement. And that's indeed what Homer wants us to keep in mind as the last scene of the poem. We will not see Troy fall. That's not recounted. It's not told. We want to remember that there are possibilities for agreement. Now, why was the war necessary? Because in their mentality, the Trojans had taken something away from them. Well, Helen, but in the Greek mentality, you know, sharing, redistributing, you know, allotting the due to everyone is foundational. So that's why you will see a lot of gifts in Greek literature. You will see a lot of prizes. You will see a lot of exchanges, all kinds of exchanges. There's a lot on inheritance because it's again about equality, what you need to have because your status will entitle you to it.
Thank you so much, Nicola. We have another couple of questions. I know that we're running a little bit over time, and Nicola has got a very important appointment with, if you know Italian, context, with Gruber, Lily Gruber. She is going to be interviewed. Yeah. So we have a question in the chat and one from Francesco Borghesi. So in the chat, let's take two at a time so you can, maybe address them both. Danilo was asking whether you could expand more on the idea of give back a civil, a political way to what we say and what we think, thanks to the study of ancient Greek. And then Francesco, please, you can just open your microphone and ask the question directly.
Proviamo.
Yeah, with your girls there, I can see.
So just change the mood a little bit. I just wanted to, well, first of all, thank you, Nicola, and thank you, Valentina. But I wanted to follow up quickly on what was said before by Peter on sort of education system. I mean, it depends. I would say that, I mean, although I wasn't asked the question, my answer would be that, it might also depend on the environment, in the sense that the grammar school system is more typical of the Anglozone or the Anglophone world, while when we talk about the teaching of Latin and Greek in a high school system in Italy or in continental Europe, we're generally talking about a public system, therefore open to everyone. When Nicola and I and others went to a liceo classico, to a classical high school, our peers were from a very different background, and that's I think specific to a public education system, and I think it changes a little bit the perception of what Latin and Greek could mean. There are others that are connected, but perhaps not the one that was mentioned before.
Hello.
Thank you, Francesco. It's nice to have a debate. That was my idea also behind this. But Nicola, please, if you want to add something here, I think it resonates with what you said.
I think that was a very useful remark, which indeed contextualizes more what was talked about. Yeah.
And to go back to what Danilo said, just to close, if you're addressing questions, though, please, I can take another one in the chat. But otherwise, we will conclude more or less with Danilo's question, which was if you can expand on how we can give back weight back to a civil, a political weight to what we say and what we think, thanks to the knowledge of, I guess, of Greek.
Well, yeah, the knowledge of ancient Greek will make us more aware of the social weight of every word we utter. We really think that what we say is ours. It's not. It's it also belongs to those whom we address when we talk. So we've got the responsibility to be aware of that, and therefore to work on truth, on honesty, on the will to be understood, and that's political to me. That's indeed civil. It makes me aware of what I say and of the consequences of what I say. So to me, so much talking, so much digital talking and writing is totally apolitical, even when sometimes it's indeed about something political. To be political doesn't mean to talk about politics. To be political to me is to want to benefit others by, by what I say, but by my awareness of what I say. It's all a question of perception, becoming more responsible when you talk.
Thank you so much, Nicola. I just wanted to, if you have other questions or comments rather now, put them in the chat and I will pass them on. But I wanted really to finish with the quotation that it would be better probably if you read it since you're the author, but I didn't warn you before. It's the same quotation that I chose for SBS Italian radio, because we go back to the idea of language and honesty, to the idea of something bigger when we take up an engagement to deal with words in a profound way. You say, and I say this in Italian, fin dai tempi di Omero la lingua è persuasione e giustizia, un legame necessario congiunge lingua, verità e bene comune. La menzogna è il più grande affronto alla dignità della parola, il mancato rispetto dei giuramenti, un crimine. This to me was really not just a revelation in itself through this, but it seems to me very topical. So since we're discussing, what is the value of, is it dangerous to think about these themes? I think that one of the greatest thing about the book is the idea of what are these kind of absolute principles that we can gather through the times. Of course, there will be more or less questionable, elements if we dig, but there are also some principles that we can learn that they are through the centuries, through the different historical and cultural contexts. And in these times of fake news, deep fakes, also today there was another example of it, where we can't understand what's real, what's not anymore, or what is just or unjust, or even truth seems questionable or a matter of opinion. I think that there is a lot to learn from that. So if you want to conclude with something on those lines, the floor is yours.
Well, no, I think you concluded wonderfully, and all I can say is, I wish you a splendid future, splendid readings, whether in Greek or in translation or in English, in French. And I thank you all for taking part in this discussion. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your patience. And I really hope that, your lives go well at this very difficult time in Australia and in the world. Really, all my best wishes.
Thank you so much, Nicola. And there's Roberto here for you to say bravo.
Thank you.
Ciao, Robbie. Thank you so much, Nicola. It was really an honor and a privilege to be able to host you. And thank you to the Istituto and to all of my colleagues and friends that came here tonight so late.
Mama.
And Mama. And thank you to Robertino that recognized this Mama. I'm coming home, love. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Valentina. Thank you, Danilo. Thank you all. Ciao.
Bye,
ciao,
everyone.
Thank you, Nicola and Valentina, and everyone for being here with us tonight.
Thank you, Danilo. It was a wonderful presentation as well. Bye, Nicola. Good luck with all of your wonderful things. This book will be huge in Italy, you see, and also beyond, I'm sure.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Valentina. Ciao.
Bye.
Good night, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Ciao Valentina.
Ciao a tutti, grazie mille per esserci stati. Roberto, vengo a casa adesso. Come mi aspetta pazientemente il mio bambino. Ciao.
Ciao.
1 second, I'm gonna take a photo because it's so cute. Roberto. Grazie Danilo, veramente è una presentazione bellissima.
Grazie Valentina, è stato un piacere, come sempre, devo dire, anche per l'intervento di Nicola. Speriamo presto
Di persona.
di poter riproporre un evento con te e Nicola o altri ospiti di persona.
Speriamo, dai Danilo, grazie intanto, che adesso vado a casa che Roberto è già pronto a mangiare, sta diventando anche un po' piangere perché vede la mamma nel video, poverino.
Certo.
Ok, bye everyone.
Bye.
Thank you Quentin, I've seen that you're here, Quentin and all the friends, so many of you. Grazie a tutti per esserci. Ciao Danilo, grazie.
Ciao, buonanotte.
Grazie, ciao a tutti. Ciao Roberto, arrivo. Grazie.